Hello, everybody, and welcome to another live stream with the Apex Communications Network. As always, I am your host, Jan Almacy, and today we are going to be exploring a little bit about the history of ancient Greece with a member of the podcast Ohio community, Mr. Ryan Stitt.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Welcome to the live stream, my friend. How are you surviving down in Dayton with all of these
not bad.
going on?
Yeah, I'm starting to go a little stir crazy now with the quarantine, but could be a lot worse. Could be sick.
Yeah, that's very true. That's what I keep trying to look at too. I mean, so for people, my listeners know this, but I always explain to people, I'm a little bit kind of in between, right? I'm an ICU nurse still, part time, but then I also do this on the the side. I guess now it's more of a full time thing since the hospital kind of dropped down. But being in the hospital and seeing everybody that's come through there and all of the community members having to deal with different things, whether it's economic impact or it's a family member that's sick or whatever else, it just makes me super, you start to, I think one thing that's been happening is people are realizing how thankful they can be for simple things. Like you said, just even health is something that's super simple.
It's been an interesting time. It's been an interesting past year. You're in Ohio. I was down here in Dayton when they hit the tornado hit us last year, and then the school or the shooting at the bar. It's just been an odd year in Ohio for me.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I totally forgot that shooting happened down at the bar.
I wasn't there, but it's a place that I've been before. So,
there's a couple of friends of mine that are nurses down there that were actually like in the vicinity when that went on, and kind of realizing that can happen in your own backyard is a sobering thought. I think it kind of woke a lot of people up as to, that's something that everyone always assumes like, oh, that'll happen somewhere else, or, that's not going to happen here type of thing. But it's a possibility.
It was an odd summer because then we had the tornado, which actually hit my place. That sucked. And then there was like a KKK rally. It was all of this happened within a few months. It was just
my
weird.
God.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
yeah, you definitely had a very interesting summer. But that's not what we're here to talk about today, as interesting as that stuff is. And I really want to talk about the fact that, firstly, that the history of ancient Greece, right? I've listened to tons of episodes. I can't say that I've listened to every single one of them, right? Because at this point we're up to 100 plus episodes.
The narrative, I think I'm at like 102, and then I have like 20 or so guest episodes, and then probably like 20 or 30 episodes that have been cross-hosted in my feed where I was I was a guest on. So I think I'm up over 140 now.
Yeah, which is absolutely phenomenal. And for those of you, so I'm going to just kind of go back and explain a little bit about what the history of ancient Greece is. And I'm just reading this directly from your website here. So the beautiful thing about this is that I am extremely interested in people that are passionate about specific things, right? That really lights me up. I love understanding what makes people passionate about things. And what I loved so much about the history of ancient Greeks when I first encountered it was that you straight up say, I am not a professional historian, right? I am just an enthusiastic amateur that is looking at trying to fill a gap basically between Alexander the Great and everything after that, essentially.
Well, yeah, kind of.
Yeah, well, I mean, but there was this gap that you identified in either textbooks or courses or other shows that you have listened to, that they didn't discuss this period of time.
So when you get
this interesting cultural shift and everything else.
Yeah, so when you a lot of places that cover ancient Greece, it's usually as kind of a cog on like in Western civilization type of courses or world history, whatever buzzword you want to use. They'll cover like a lot of world history podcasts. They'll cover ancient Greece in 10 episodes, 15 episodes. It's just, okay, you have Homer, you have the polis, you have democracy, you have theater, you have Sparta, you have Alexander the Great, and then maybe a few random things here and there, and then it's kind of okay, the Romans. And specifically, there was a lot of podcasts that dealt with Roman history and actually some Bronze Age type of ancient world, Near East, but there wasn't really any that kind of focused specifically on Greece. I waited around for it. So there was the Ancient World by Scott Chesworth. He did like the Near East. Mike Duncan did the history of Rome.
Right.
Jamie Redfern had like the history of Alexander. There was a couple randomly interspersed in there, but nobody really tackled Greece. And when I waited for it, and then I was like, well, I'll do it. And then I found out why nobody did it, because it was a cluster. So if you think about it, like Roman history, I mean, obviously when you get to like the empire, they have different provinces and stuff, and then you start having a little bit of different theaters, but for the most part, Roman history, it starts at Rome, and like everything reverberates around Rome. It is the epicenter. So you have like this one narrative coming out from, say, 753 BC when it supposedly was founded, and then you just kind of follow that through. But with Greece, they were never unified, and you have thousands of different polises with multiple theaters throughout the entire Mediterranean, with nowhere near the level of like historical sources that talk about their history. I mean, early Roman history is very suspect because it's not written until hundreds of years later, but at least they have something written down, whereas you don't really get much about Greece until you get to the classical period. So yeah, it's just a lot going on at once, and it's especially in the archaic and the early period of it. So it's a lot of it's a headache if you aren't. It's hard for like a complete amateur. I say I'm an amateur, but I mean, I did take grad courses. I did go to grad school. I studied in Greece. I studied in Italy and Sicily. So like I was familiar. I've read a lot. I even edited Wikipedia articles before I started the podcast. So I was like familiar with Greek history. So I wasn't a complete noob. It'd be very difficult for like somebody who's just like, okay, I like Greek history, let me put this together, without really knowing like the skeleton of how to divvy it up for it to make sense.
Right. Well, why don't we talk about that? Let's talk about your experience studying in Greece, because that seems to be kind of like a huge point that solidified your love for the Grecian history and everything like that. What was that part of like a grad school program or an undergrad program that you got to study abroad, and what was your major in school?
So I went to the University of Alabama, and I didn't know that I wanted to study classics until I was until I was I don't know, like sophomore year, I think, maybe late sophomore year. I actually was like chemistry major and a bio major. And then I wanted to go to law school. So then I dropped.
I say, oh, wow, as if like I'm not a nurse that decided to go into marketing communications.
And then I wanted to go to law school. So I dropped the chemistry and biology, and I took Latin in criminal justice and stuff. And then I was like, oh, I can go to law school and take like these history and Latin and Greek classes. This is cool. So I had like the pre-law track going on. And then I ended up spending several of my last semesters in my senior year, the summer before as well, studying abroad, because we had a small classics department. I mean, I love my professors, but it was very small, so I wanted to go learn more and experience more. And also it was out of state tuition, which it was actually cheaper for me to go to Europe than my tuition at my university.
Oh, wow. So and I think it's the best way to learn about things, that if you're truly passionate about that kind of stuff, the best way to learn is just to immerse yourself in cultures and stuff like that. And it may not be ancient history, going over there and immersing yourself in the culture, but there's something fundamentally different about being able to, I know from personal experience, my uncle was a priest at the Vatican. And there's something fundamentally different about being inside of St. Peter's Basilica than there is just looking at pictures or reading about it.
Well, that's being over there. So I was in Athens. I was a student in Athens. So like having courses, say, like today we're going to go to class, and then we're going to like spend the afternoon, the morning, walking through the Parthenon and learning in situ or on site, and then we're going to come back to the classroom and talk about it afterwards was like very solidifying in me. Like I loved learning about ancient Greece beforehand, but that like kind of like, okay, I don't think I want to go to law school anymore. I want to go to grad school.
Right.
I didn't end up finishing grad school. I don't think law school would have been a great route for me either. I'm happy with the route that I took now, but yeah, like it completely solidified like not only my passion, but like what I thought was going to be my career path. And I mean, once I get done with the Air Force, or I may end up going back and trying to teach high school history or something. I don't know. But even if I don't make a career out of it, it's still like a passion that I have that's going to follow me for the rest of my life.
Right. Well, and that's something that I'm like, and really why I'm super interested to continue the conversation as we start to get into why you started the podcast and why you've continued it. Because I feel like that's two separate things. Starting a show and then being willing to put in work for over 120, 140 episodes, where you're sitting at right now, is two fundamentally different things. And having passion is really the only way that you can get that moving and stay with that momentum over that long of a period of time, especially with the type of content that you produce that requires so much input.
So I started. So the reason I started it was because I actually came to classics through non-traditional means. Okay. So when you mean by traditional, you mean like classroom settings. People grew up learning about it in school. I was a lower middle class family from Amish country, Pennsylvania. I didn't take Latin in high school. I actually took German for 7 years. I don't remember any German. I didn't know what
about Spanish.
I tell people all the time, like, oh, they asked me how I got into like ancient languages. And I was like, well, I got to college and I had to continue. You either had to take like a computer course at the University of Alabama for a whole year. Or you had to take a language. And I was like, I know German. Let me look at German. And I was like, German 5 days a week at 8 a.m. Latin 2 days a week at 2 p.m. So that's how I chose Latin on a whim. And
yeah.
Or it might have been 3 p.m. actually. I don't know. I just know it was in the afternoon.
Either way, that was a well thought out decision on your part.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, and then they had the one day a week class was like computer based. But yeah, so that's how I got to Latin, and then I learned a lot through podcasts early on. iTunes used courses, documentaries. Because I had a small classics department. I really like learned. My thirst for knowledge was quenched on my own a lot. Learning through all these non-traditional means, and even in my classes, we used something called Tegrity. I don't know if they still use it now, but like they would record and sync up lectures and with the slides, so I could upload the RSS feed into Apple Music or iTunes at that point, and I could go back and re-listen to the lectures over and over again. So that was like my experience was audio coming to it. Right. So I was very deeply familiar with that process when I've basically my entire learning experience since college has been with podcast or some sort of audio. So that's why I was like always drawn to that.
Right.
And then when I got to
transition,
what was that?
It was just a very natural transition for you to kind of move forward because you understood the value of what audio can really bring to somebody. Especially,
I learned a lot, like, on the go. Like, okay, I'm walking in. We had at the University of Alabama, for example, and when I went to UCLA, it was a massive campus, both of them. So it's like, I could like download an entire like lecture and my entire walk from one end of the campus to the other. I could listen to the lectures over and over again. Yeah. So it was just, now when I listen to podcasts, I do it when I like do chores and things like that. So, I don't know. It's just something that I have, I guess, I don't want to say take for granted. It's just something that was always just like innately kind of like into my learning processes.
Right. It's just part of who you are.
And yeah. So when I got to UCLA, I went there for some grad courses. Like I said earlier, we were talking about like there was nothing in Greece, but like I listened to the Mike Duncan's History of Rome, and I was like, oh, this is awesome. Somebody should do one for Greece. And then when I left, I'm going to say 2013 to go into the private sector, I wanted to make a podcast then. Like I really wanted to make one, but I was petrified. I was like scared to make one. And I tell this to people all the time. Not all the time, but like when I'm trying to like drive home a point.
Right.
It took me 4 years from 2013, no, 3 years, public math, to 2016, from 2013 to 2016 to just like get out of my own way and start a podcast. Like that's when I mentioned earlier, I was doing like Wikipedia articles. I was editing those. I was just like reading a lot. I had like all of these massive notes because I'm someone when I was taking grad classes, like I would read a book and I'd have to make summaries of them because in order for me to understand what was going on, I had to like analyze it and write it down. Like,
right.
So I had like all these massive notes. I had all this information. So I was like, oh, but nobody's going to listen to me if I make a podcast. Like nobody would listen ever. And
I hear that all the time. I
thought, and even when I started it, I was like, okay, this is just going to be me putting it out there. It may help some grad students. Like it helped me. It may help a few people. At most, probably like my family will listen. Nobody else. It's like, okay, so we're here 4 years later. 4 years later, I have almost 4 million downloads, and I barely have gotten anyone in my family even to listen to me. So it's like the complete opposite of what I thought.
We started when we first started out. We launched in 2018, right? So we've only been around for a year, but we had 3 listeners. Our first one, 2 of which were me and my co-founder. So, and like, I tell people like, and like you said, this is just like, if it helps one person, if it helps a grad student, if, I know that it benefited me, that's where it all should start. When people are approaching me and they're talking about wanting to start a show and stuff like that, and they start talking about, if their very first sentence is, I want to talk about this because I know that there's this audience out there that will listen to it so I can monetize it and all this other kind of stuff, I'm like, stop. Right.
Exactly.
You're going to experience pod fade. You're not going to enjoy it. And I was like, it's not going to be successful. And then they kind of look at me side eyed, but I tell them like, people can feel whether or not you're passionate about what you're talking about through the microphone, whether or not you think they can hear it or not. It is almost impossible to directly convey excitement or passion about something if you're not actually excited or passionate about it.
Exactly.
And having over 4 million downloads like that, like over the last, so what are we in 2020 now? So over the last 4 years.
I hit my 4-year anniversary last year, which I completely forgot about because of COVID quarantine. I completely forgot until you reminded me. So thank you.
Yeah. Congratulations on your 4-year anniversary, my friend. And but being able to keep it consistent for over the last 4 years, I'm like, do you think that you would have been able to do that if you weren't passionate about it? No,
not at all. It's become similar to what you said. I've helped mentor a lot of people who. So backtrack a little bit. So like the reason I had a lot of success when I started was I happened to it was a lot of luck, to be honest. I happened to tap into a perfect time where like there's still a thirst for knowledge, like ancient world knowledge and knowledge in general, but there was a specific thirst like the same I had. There was a lot of people that wanted an ancient Greek history podcast, and I just happened to tap into it at the right time, and I was just lucky. And then I've had a lot of people, a lot of classics professors, history professors, what have you, other podcasters who helped me get the word out right away. My social media blew up. People, and then like it just started to snowball. So I feel really lucky in that sense that I like kind of just like I timed it right. I mean, if I would have done it 4 years earlier, who knows how I still kick myself because now you're starting to reach a point with podcasts where it's kind of like, is there going to be a bubble soon with like history podcasts? Like everyone, there seems to be so many new ones. And I kind of jumped right into it right before that happened, before it was like, everybody has a podcast now, which I mean, I don't want to dissuade anyone from creating a podcast if that's what you want to do, but just know that it's it's going to be a lot harder now to jump in to get success into it than it was, like 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Or 8 years ago for that matter. Yeah. But yeah, I've been kind of now back to where I was. I've been mentoring newer podcasts because I kind of feel like it's my duty to kind of help out with that. And I always tell them, I was like, you got to choose something that you're really passionate about. I don't care if it's Rome and there's like 20 Rome podcasts. Don't do like the history of, like Spain or something if you're not really passionate about Spanish history.
Right.
If you're passionate about Roman history, do that. You'll find people that will listen to it because of what you're doing. And just because there's someone else that does Roman history, or heck, there's like 2 other podcasters now who are doing the history of Greece. And I've reached out to them. I was like, yeah, that's fine. Like, you guys are going to say, you're going to have a different voice than I have. I'm still going to share your stuff. I'll promote you. There's no like angst or anger or any of that sort of stuff. Like, some people might not like my methodology. Some people might not like the way I like speak. People don't like just, like superficial things of that nature. So it's like, you'll find an audience as long as you're super passionate about it. And it has to be something like, because most people aren't going to turn this into like a full-time job. Like, the vast majority of people aren't. I haven't, I'm in the Air Force, I told you. So it's going to be something that you have to have a massive amount of a passion for, that you can come home every night from work and you can sit at your kitchen table like I do and put like an hour or 2 in every single day.
Yep.
If I don't, I don't, if I can't put something in, time in that day, I make sure to like make up for it the next day. You have to be very rigid with it, or else you're just gonna kind of like, the terminology uses, like kind of pod fade.
Right.
You're gonna get burnout. I mean, I've gotten quite burnt out over these last 4 years, and I've had to come up with like new ways to kind of like mentally excite myself. So it's going to happen. And when you hit that burnout, you're going to need to be doing something that you still really, really love, that you can get through that instead of just, quitting it.
Well, and I think the other interesting thing about all of that is that when you're super passionate about something, I'm going to use an example of just like you're taking a college course, right? And I know as a nursing major, so I went to school and I have nursing and a minor in clinical psychology, right? And I always compare, like, your minor is kind of like that next big thing that you're interested in, right? So there's a reason why I didn't minor in statistics or math, right? Because if I would have minored in statistics or like calculus or some type of engineering or whatever, I probably would have not had a very positive experience, right? Because there's zero part of me that's passionate about trying to figure out the sum of some type of statistical equation, right? And I would have done the minimum to get by. I wouldn't have explored it any deeper than I had to for the classroom. And would have been perfectly okay with getting a C in that course, right? But now we flip the mindset. In clinical psychology, I was so interested in it that I watched hours of YouTube videos, listened to hours of podcasts, went on Khan Academy and found a whole bunch of different courses and videos on like psychology of personality, abnormal psychology, Erickson's stages. Like, we're looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and we're doing all of these different things, where my minor in clinical psychology, it can, with the number of hours that I put in educating myself outside, can probably be a double bachelor's, because I was so excited about it that I was interested to dive deeper. And I think that that's what really brings that next level of value whenever you're putting out content, is that, if you're talking about something that you only want to give a C level of effort to, it's going to be a C level product, and people are going to listen to it, and they're only going to get a C level value out of it. Whereas if you flip that and you're willing to put in as much effort as possible to get that A, but it's now almost self-care, because you're excited, you're interested in it, you're excited about it. And like you said, you have to find different ways to keep it exciting over the last 4 years, but it's almost because like you start to develop this relationship with the show and with your audience. And just like with any other relationship, you have to find ways to spice it up and keep it fresh. Otherwise, the relationship dies.
I also just burnt myself out with before I got to Ohio, I was in Texas, and it was in the middle of nowhere, West Texas, so I didn't really have a whole lot to do in terms of like social life. So like, it was just basically work and putting out an episode every week.
Was that Air Force?
Yeah, and
were you at like?
We can talk about. What was that?
Were you at like Shepherd? Out in the
No,
middle of nowhere.
I was a good fellow.
Okay, yeah,
It,
definitely out in the middle of nowhere.
yeah. So yeah, so like I was putting an episode out like every week, and we can talk about this I guess in a little bit, but like the methodology behind the podcast is just so strenuous that like every week just and working a full-time job just kind of like just mentally exhausted me. And
Yeah.
so then I started doing guest episodes because I was like, oh, okay, those aren't a whole lot. Those aren't near as much work. I can let other people talk about their research, books they're promoting. I don't have to do a whole lot of research my own. It's like a win-win. And
Right.
like people really liked them, and it kind of like, re-energized me. And then I also did some, and when I got to Ohio, I started doing like some speaking engagements at some universities and high schools and interacting with the kids, both at college and high school and some middle school. It that really helped to re-energize. So it wasn't like I lost the passion. It was just mentally fatigued.
Yeah, yeah. Well, because people, and that's what this will actually just kind of transition us into that next point where it's like it's possible to get burnt out producing content, or
Mhm.
even if you're super passionate about it, that structure. And we kind of experienced the same thing when we started Apex, right? We only
Mhm.
had one type of episode. It was strictly interviews, and we had to constantly hunt down guests,
Mhm.
do research on guests, figure out how to get them on the show. Okay, we only have, one episode left in the bank. We need to go out and try to recruit somebody to come on. Who are we going to interview? And you put that stress on yourself because you only have one segment model, right?
Mhm.
And so, like, when I'm reaching back, like you said, with that whole, you've been in the podcast game for a little while, so you're trying to reach back and pull other people up. It's just,
Mhm.
I tell them, okay, take a second. How can you come up with other types of episodes for your show that you can do other than the main one that you currently have? You need to try to come up with
Mhm.
at least 3 segments total so that you can have a little
Mhm.
bit of diversity and play around with it. Insert this here. Okay, if this type of episode, like you said, has a very long prep time and you need a little bit more time to give it justice. For us, we started implementing things like our 5-minute rant episodes, or we have little tiny clips where I'm giving condensed advice that are only 10 or 12 minutes long,
Mhm.
and they only require half an hour of prep work, but it gives us that buffer for the next week where we can recruit a guest in 2 weeks
Mhm.
because we now have that space. So do you think that really kind of allowing yourself to have those different segments and stuff, it really did that, what did it do to enhance your ability to avoid fading or to avoid that mental stress?
So I get very I'm very tough on myself in the way I make the episodes. Like I want them to be perfect, and they're not all gonna ever be perfect. So like,
Mhm.
like I spend almost anywhere from like 50 to 100 hours per narrative episode, just because I'm like going through all the primary sources, making sure I included everything. I'm looking at a bunch of secondary sources. I'm trying to be as thorough as possible. At
Right.
first, that's kind of what burnt me out. Like at
Mhm.
first I was just, I would do that and then I would move on to the next episode. I would do that and then I would move on to the next episode, and it's just like, and then I'd get like so like, oh, I forgot something, and I had to like go back and re-record segments and put them into the older episodes. And then I was just like, okay, if we're going to do it, if I'm going to be this thorough, then I need to start writing a bunch of scripts way
Mhm.
ahead of where I'm recording. That way I can go back and edit them so I'm not constantly recording and fixing and doing that, because so I kind of do it now where I have like 8 episodes written
Mhm.
way ahead of where I'm recording, and
Mhm.
I know that's just completely insane, but that's just my methodology. So like when I started doing some of these guest episodes, it helped me kind of do that research and get way ahead of where I'm
Right.
at. So
Yeah.
like right now, I have all of my episodes. I just finished the Sicilian expedition at 413 BC. I have all of my episodes done until like the 390s, researched and written up.
Hmm. Mhm. And that's what, like, that it's another thing that people really overlook in the podcasting game, or really the content game
Mm-hmm.
in general, is having a bank of
Mm-hmm.
stuff that you can lean on. Um, and then, hey, what's up, Mike? Welcome to the live stream, my friend. Um, is that you can have we right now have at least 4 episodes in the bank at any given time. right? Recorded,
Yeah.
drafts in Libsyn. Libsyn is the our hosting provider, and so we have at any given time 4 episodes ready in our drafts that we can just drop
Mm-hmm.
at any moment, because as we're a startup communications company, so
Mm-hmm.
and at any point in time we might get inundated with a whole bunch of stuff or have to pivot or do other things and lose focus on the show.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's nice to know that we have at least a month worth of episodes that we can lean on and then potentially play catch up with. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
because what I found that actually does is it frees up your mental capacity to not worry about putting out an episode week to week,
Mm-hmm.
but put out quality week to
Yeah.
week.
That's my biggest concern. I don't want to put something that's substandard out just to get something out. I'd much rather the listeners wait. Instead of every 2 weeks, one a month. I'm down to almost like one a month now. Just also my episodes have gotten progressively longer. I'm not quite the Dan Carlin range yet, but they started out like 30 minutes and now I'm like an hour 45, 2 hours. There's been a 2.5 hour episode. And those are just
Yeah, the last one that
yeah.
the last one that I listened to was The Greek World Turned Upside Down, and that one was like 2 hours and 5 minutes or something like that.
Well, people are like, well, why don't you just split them in half? And I was like, well, it's not that simple. Like, I don't want to split an episode in half just to split it in half. I want it to be, I want a natural endpoint.
Right.
So every episode can kind of stand on its own. I mean, with the narrative episode, you kind of need to know what happened beforehand, but you can kind of listen to that episode and kind of be fine with it. I don't want to like disrupt it in the middle just because it's the 45-minute mark. Like disrupt the story. Like
you mean that you can record podcasts that are longer than half an hour, even though that's what Google says is like the optimum range for a podcast episode?
which people are like, oh, I only listen to episodes that are like 30, 35, 40 minutes. Anything longer than that, I kind of like, I can't listen to it on my commute. I can't do any of that. I was like, well, your pod player has a pause button, right? And like a lot of people and also a lot of people binge listen, so it's not really much different either. So I don't really get that whole like, oh, what should I do? Should I do long episodes, short episodes? It's kind of entirely up to you and your methodology.
Do what makes you feel like you covered your topic to the best of your ability. That's what I always tell people. It's just like, because people, especially in the world that I'm kind of in with like dealing with companies, they're like, oh, like we can only put out 5 minutes, because the thing is that these people have been so inundated with traditional marketing schemes for so long that they're like being told consistently that the human attention span for whatever reason is shrinking, like we're freaking goldfish, and we can only focus for 5 seconds at a time before our brain moves on to something else. And I was like, okay. I was like, what? When's the last time that you binged watched, I don't know, The Office, Susan? Like, and how many did Netflix stop and ask you if you were still okay halfway through your 5-hour binge session on the Office? Like, yeah, okay. Don't tell me that a podcast episode has to be 5 minutes long when you just spent, rewatching this TV show for the 15th time.
Exactly.
And when I kind of bring that point up, they're like, oh yeah. If I have high quality content that is engaging and that people care about, I can hold their attention for longer than 5 seconds. And I tell them the beautiful thing about audio is that you can listen to it when you're at the grocery store. I've listened to it on a treadmill. I've listened to it while I was straight up just working out. You listen to it in the car, listen to it while you're doing chores. It's pretty much anything. It's very, very versatile. And you can find a show on virtually anything.
So that's the kind of like, with mine in particular, THOAG, what makes it different than a college course? I mean, obviously there's no interaction. It's not an interactive style of learning, so it's completely different in that sense. Right. But the one positive for it is I'm not bound to a, 15-week, 3 hours a week type of lecture where you only like kind of hit the high points and you can, because you're limited to time. I want to include all of the details. Well, you can't include all of the details, but I want to be as specific and comprehensive as I possibly can, because I have that time. Like I don't have like a 50-minute hard off because,
they have to go to
the students have to get to the next class sort of thing. Like I can keep going and expound upon it further and further. And the reason that episodes are just getting longer and longer is because I'm 4 years into the podcast. I didn't know what I was doing at first. A lot of my initial 20 or 30 episodes were a lot of these are the facts. It was like fact. I didn't do a whole lot of analysis. I didn't write very well, and that's something else. My scripts are all written, and that's something else that I had to learn was how to write for audio. Whereas I was writing very academically, and it's a different skill set. I had to write for how a listener would want to hear, not like how a journal entry or professor is going to grade. At first, my sentences were very Ciceronian. They were like very long. The verbs were at the end. It was very not natural, and it took me a little while to learn that. And so I'm getting better and still improving with as the time goes on. I found that my academic writing is not as good as it used to be now because
you clicked over. And I tell people when they're trying to learn that, the easiest thing to do is just flip on like dictation on your Microsoft Word or whatever, you're using, and just talk for, 2 or 3 minutes and look at the way that the computer dictated your language, because that's the way that you're naturally speaking. And then if you compare that directly to, it's actually very astounding. If you take the time to write a paragraph and then look at it and then read that same paragraph out loud, you'll actually realize that your brain is inserting words into the paragraph even as you're reading it, it'll try to start filling in the gaps. And when people start to realize that, they're like, oh man, like this is a completely different ball game.
Well, that's kind of how, so I have a script that I write. And then when I record, like half of the script just sounds awful when I say it out loud. So it's kind of like, okay, so I'll say it, and then I'm just like, that sounds clunky. And then, so what ends up becoming like a 2-hour episode usually takes me like 5, almost 4.5 hours to record, because I'm just like, okay, that sounds terrible. And then on the fly, I have to think of a more natural way to say that. So it's a process. It's still like, I can't write scripts perfectly. I'm still like fixing them as I'm recording, because I'm just like, okay, that sounds way too formal. This is not like this is not how people would hear in a conversation.
Right. Well, so I think that people get the general idea about about podcasting, right? And you have to be passionate about it. Don't time limit yourself. Explore things as deeply as you can, because you're the one that sets that hard off. You're the only, you're in charge, right? Focus on everything that you can do to try to find that niche or that thing that's going to push you to take that, from a C to an A. And don't focus so much on like your audience right off the bat. You need to talk about what you're passionate about first, and then your audience will start to show themselves, and then you can interact with them and try to modify your show from there. But too many times people focus on identifying their audience before they even start a show, and then it's like, okay, are you even talking about something that you really want to talk about, or are you just trying to jump into podcasting because it's cool? But something that
you're not gonna know your audience either. If your podcast, if your podcast is successful or unsuccessful, either way, you're not gonna know your audience. I didn't know my audience, and I'm still shocked at the type of demographics of people who listen to mine. Like, there's teenagers that listen to my episodes, and I'm just like, man, when I was a teenager, like, this is some very intense stuff. Like, I was not interested in this as a teenager. I've gotten emails from non-native speakers who listen to my podcast to A, learn Greek history, and B, to improve upon English. And it's like, whoa, that's
I just got a message from my mom is from Slovakia, and I just got a message from some people in Slovakia, which I'm assuming heard about my show through either my cousins or my family that are there. And they messaged the podcast and said that they've been listening to my episodes to try to learn English better, because there's 2 or 3 episodes on the show that I actually speak both Slovak and English on. And they've been listening to them and like kind of making fun of my American accent when I speak Slovak. But then also like taking that and learning English based off of my show. And that's,
Mhm.
it's actually interesting that you brought that up, because I've heard that a couple of the times now from podcasters that have a decent following, that people that are non-native English speakers are listening to their shows to learn English.
Which is funny because most of my complaints about my podcast are the way I say words. You have like pedants out there, and it's
Yeah.
like, you're just being you're just being a pedant if you like if I have non-native speakers who, the only words they don't understand are the Greek words, which they ask for me to like, send them a list of Greek words because it's my anglicized / modern Greek / ancient Greek hybrid, and that's a whole new separate issue with Greek. And they're like, oh yeah, I understand your English fine, and then you have other people who are like, I don't like the way he says escape. Like you have people who make complaints.
People can find anything.
Anonymous Twitter warriors.
Yeah, keyboard warriors get super stuff.
But yeah, like if you have like non-native speakers like using your podcast to learn English, that's that those people are just kind of like, get out of here.
Yeah, exactly. So I want to kind of dive into a little bit of the content of the show itself.
Okay.
Now, my very basic understanding of Grecian history, right? Because this is something that I was like, back in the day, I would have been one of the teenagers that is listening to your show, right?
Mhm.
I was homeschooled all the way up until I was 13. So I essentially just went to the library and checked out encyclopedias and would like read those because I was just bored, essentially, and super, super interested in just asking why. And my dad was really into Greek and Roman mythology. So I was constantly reading about the ancient structure, and like some of my favorite things are these History Channel documentaries and stuff to look over. But I also kind of noticed the same thing, that it's like they talk about every single documentary, every single book talked about the same periods, the same characters, the same timelines, and then there was this transition point that the Grecian side of things kind of fell off the map, and it was only talked about in relationship to the Roman Empire or other things happening in that area. It wasn't really directly addressing Greece, sorry. And it was looking at it in perspective. So if you had to pick like one of your favorite periods of time, which is probably like asking you to pick which child of yours would be your favorite child, but if you had to distill down one of your favorite periods in Grecian history, could you, or is that too difficult of a discrimination to make?
It's probably the period that I'm in currently. So I've been in the 5th century for a little over 2 years now, just because we have a lot of sources there. And also when I got to the 5th century, I decided to do a cultural tour. So I paused the narrative for like a year and a half and just talked about all sorts of different like theater, education, women's lives, law, basically just did a tour of the culture before we like started the Peloponnesian War. So I've kind of been in the 5th century forever. Before I was really big into the archaic period. I found that fascinating because I'm really big into like the origins of things, right. Which is what drew me to ancient history to begin with, which is why I like the Roman Republic too, but not so much the Roman Empire. When it comes crashing down, I'm more into the origins of things.
Like how it got built up.
Yeah, how it got built up. So yeah, that's kind of. So I would say the classical period, but another big impetus to like for me to start the podcast was like a lot of Greek history courses. Even in college, they kind of like just end with Alexander, and there's like a whole fascinating period in the Hellenistic period, which it's going to take me forever to get there at this rate. But that's like something that I know about, but I don't know quite as much, just because I haven't taken many formal classes on it. Like you said, it's not really talked about in most textbooks and most documentaries, other than like a handful of events, and usually those events have to do with Rome. Like it's like Pyrrhus of Epirus versus the Romans, or you have like the Romans and Cleopatra, you have like that entire Eastern Mediterranean basically is usually only talked about in their relation to Rome.
Right.
And so I'm pretty excited to like dig deep into it. There are a couple of podcasts currently that are covering it. So like I'm not in a hurry now, like, which I'm fantastic. So like the recent episode or the recent season of The Ancient World. And there's also a Hellenistic Age podcast as well by Derek. And so they're covering it pretty well. So when I get there, it's just like I'll take my time to get there, and it'll just be like me like learning a lot of new stuff for the first time. And that's also something I really want to emphasize is I thought I really knew Greek history when I started this. Like I thought I did, and I only knew maybe like 5% of Greek history. Mm-hmm. Like the more you learn, the less I'm like, okay, a lot of the stuff that we think we know is a lot of conjecture based on the theories. And so like there's not as much evidence as I thought. Mm-hmm. So like, and then we get into the details, like the more I'm learning, the more I'm realizing that I actually didn't know as much as I thought. And so I'm learning quite a bit as I go on as well.
Right. I think that's super. I mean, there's that idiom that basically is like, you know, the more you know, the less you know.
Yeah.
The more that you learn, the more that you realize how inept you are, and how much of a tiny portion of the knowledge you're actually able to capture at one time. And so that 5% is very. When I first started recording the Apex, I was like, okay, I understand, you know, because I had been. I got out. I just recently got out of the Air Force in February. I made it up to E6. And I was the non-commissioned officer in charge of training my last 3 years. And, you know, gone to ALS and taken a bunch of leadership courses and done all these other things. So I was like, okay, I have a decent grasp on leadership from this level. Right? I understand what it's like to be that boots on the ground middleman to take orders from above and then get it implemented with the junior enlisted tier. I get that flow relatively well. And then I started interviewing people on the show and thinking, okay, I have a decent understanding about how leadership works. I've read a ton of leadership books. You know, I've all these different things. It's like the same principles no matter what. And then I realized I did not know shit about like all the different leadership styles, the different interactions you can have with people. I learned a ton about like just empathy and design empathy mapping and like actually doing persona analyses of the people that you're leading and all this other stuff. And it was like my mind was just exploded. And that was within like the first 10 interviews, you know, and we're coming close to 60 episodes here soon. And now my perception, I go back and I listen to like my first episode and I'm like, ugh.
Yeah, mine aren't very good either.
That was
well, my first 8 episodes. This is funny. My first 8 episodes, they're no longer there. I had to redo them because this is how technologically a noob I was. I bought not this microphone, but the one I had before, and I plugged it in, and I recorded my first 6 episodes. And every time I'd listen back to them, and I was like, why is my audio so bad? Like people are putting out much better audio quality. I sound like I'm like a squawking hawk. And then I go to find out that I had my microphone plugged in, but I never actually selected it, so I was using my internal microphone the entire time to record.
Oh my god.
Yeah. So I had to go back and re-record all 8 of the first episodes like 6 months after the fact.
I had a very similar experience with so like my setup right now, I have an SM7B, and then we use like a little dynamite stick so that I don't have to turn the gain up so high. But I have like a Behringer UMC 404 interface. And I didn't realize that there was a switch on the back for the phantom power. So like when I first started using these dynamite sticks, like the guy from Sweetwater Sound that I was talking to was like, yeah, like this is really helpful when you're recording in close proximity because you don't have to turn the gain up as high. And the microphone sensitivity is still good. I was like, oh, okay, cool. But then I would plug it in and the mic would shut off. I was like, what the hell is going on? Like he told me that this was going to help everything out. I can't figure this out. So I'm about to record a podcast episode with a guest. And I ended up calling my buddy who's like our producer. He's my co-founder. And he was just happened to be driving past my apartment at the time because our studio was my apartment. And he stops in, walks into the room, flips one switch on the back of the interface and was like, now try it. And I was like, oh my God. And so my guest is like, just staring at me like I don't really know what the hell I'm doing. And I really didn't at that time. And I'm still learning. There's so much about audio equipment and everything else. But my caveat to that is it looks like, what is that? A Yeti Blue? No, that's not a blue.
Yeah.
Is it a
Yeah.
snow? It is a blue. Yeah, because the other one's a
Mhm.
snowball.
I like it. I like this. It
But
picks up on my dog making his background noise, but
but people think that, like, I tell people all the time, you do not need my setup in order to be a podcaster and to be successful.
I'm
You
sitting
can
at my
get
kitchen table with
exactly. You can get a Yeti that, because I'm pretty sure that model is a USB, right?
yeah, I think it was about 130
Yeah.
ish. This
Yeah.
wasn't the first one. I started out with a Technica that was like $35,
Yeah.
like an ATR. I think it was like 2100 or something. It was like
Mhm.
$35. I recommend that you start out with like like a decent cheap one. Don't go splurging money until you know that you're going to stick with it.
Right.
And usually, I think people consider like 10 episodes kind of like that make or break point, give or take. So I wouldn't like go buy like a $200 microphone right from the get go. That
No. No.
until you're like invest it,
Yeah, we
like
just had a conversation
emotionally
about
invested.
it. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's a big one. We just had a
Mhm.
conversation with a different live stream, and we talked about the setups that each of us had, because there was 3 of us on the stream, and,
Mhm.
like, we've been at this for almost 60 episodes, and it wasn't until, probably 30 deep, that we invested in the SM7Bs.
Mhm.
But it's because that we've recorded by bonfires, we've recorded, in basements, we've recorded on site for different places, and just having the built-in windscreen and everything else was so much nicer for this. But I had 2 people on the stream. One was using a gamer's headset that was
Mhm.
$130 and sounded amazing. And then the other guy was using an ATR 2200 that was $50 and sounded just as good
I have
on the stream.
Beats. I have Beats by Dre.
Yeah. Like,
These are my headphones that I use are the ones that I actually listen to music on.
and you can do that kind of stuff. So it doesn't need to be like all of the fanciest equipment and all of the best practices right off the bat. Really, you should focus on trying to get your content down first.
Mhm.
Um, so eh, you're in the classical era right now, right?
Yeah, I'm late, almost the last decade of the 5th century.
And then, so you're going to continue moving through. Do you foresee, like, what is the end point for this? And then do you foresee you starting another show after this, or has, the last, you're probably going to end up being, 5 or 6 years deep by the time you finish everything.
Maybe 5 or 6 years after this.
Yeah, I was going to
At
say,
the rate I'm going.
right, you've got quite a ways to go
It
to
just
keep
it just
rolling.
depends where life takes me, I suppose. Right now, the end point is supposed to be Actium, the Battle of Actium in 31 BC. So when Cleopatra and Mark Antony lose, and then Cleopatra commits suicide, it's the end of the Ptolemaic Egypt period, which is the last quote unquote Hellenistic
Mhm.
successor kingdom of Alexander. And at that point, the entire Mediterranean is Roman. You still have Greece, but the Greeks are Romans at that point.
Right.
They're in the Roman Empire. I may do some extra episodes to kind of talk about some things, but the detail that I'm going in now, 31 BC, is probably where I'm going to end, just because I'm just not as passionate about the Roman Empire as I am about the ancient Greece and the Roman Republic.
Mhm.
I don't know why. I don't find the emperors as appealing. Like I said, I think it falls back more onto I like the buildup of things, and
Right.
then the empires kind of when it comes tumbling down and transitions, it just doesn't suit me, or it just doesn't fascinate me as much.
Right.
If I were to do a second podcast, I highly doubt I will, just because I think this is just gonna mentally tire me out by the time I'm done. But if I were to do it, second podcast, my second favorite period is Italy from the Black Death through the Renaissance.
Okay.
So I would do something around that time period, completely not ancient at all. But
Right.
I just don't know if I'm gonna ever, like, once I finish this in 2025, I probably, hopefully at that point I will have like a family, and I
Right.
will not have the time that I have now.
Right. Right. Could you see yourself, like, if you had the opportunity, if you get out of the military or, whatever, being a full-time podcaster?
Yeah, I would totally jump on that. It's just very hard to get into. It's that's another thing a lot of people should know. It's like you you're not going to do podcasting if you're wanting to get rich. That very rarely happens,
Yep.
and you usually have to have the right connections or dumb luck, or you started it a way like a while ago.
Right.
um,
And that's coming from somebody with 4 million plus downloads, people.
yeah.
So that's what, we're,
I get money. I get some donations. I get ad revenue. I get Patreon. I make money off of it. It's a good side hustle / second job,
right.
but it's not enough to be. No, it wouldn't be enough to be a full time job.
No.
I make way more doing what I do in my day job.
Exactly. And that's what I want people to really, kind of to end the note on is just the entire message behind it. Exactly why I wanted to record this was
Mhm.
twofold, right? One, I wanted to make sure that we educated people on podcasting
Mhm.
and why it's important to be passionate about it and why you shouldn't do it like with money motivation and other stuff like that, and talk about obviously what made you passionate enough about it to keep it going this long
Mhm.
with the intention to potentially to keep it going until, like you said, 2025 or so. That takes a lot.
Roughly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
be that passionate about something to keep it rolling for that long. So what I will, kind of wrap up from my end, and then I'll essentially just give you the floor to plug what you need to plug, is
Mhm.
that if you're looking to get into content production, whether it's audio, whether it's video, whether it's written word, because I've done all three at this point, you need to make sure that you're doing something that you either have a personal connection to, because you're passionate about it, or because you can see it directly benefiting another person. And like if you have a talent, say for photography or video, and you can see that that talent would directly benefit a population, if you were to pursue that, by all means. Because
Mhm.
when you do that and you can watch it directly affect another person in a positive way, that is like the ultimate give back.
Mhm.
That it feels awesome knowing that you are contributing to this. And then if you find something that you're so passionate about it that you don't care whether you have one listener or 4 million plus downloads, you're just going to continue to put it out. Um, that's a beautiful thing, and
Mhm.
having the listeners come in and getting the ad revenue and having the Patreon and everything else like that is nice, but that doesn't kick in for a while. And it's normally way beyond that 10 episode make or break
Mhm.
that stuff starts to kick in.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's kind of where I'll leave it. I'll let you talk about,
Mhm.
THOAG a little bit more and kind of tell people where to go. For those of you that are watching on my Facebook watch party, I will be posting the link to the episodes and to his Facebook page
Mhm.
on the watch party, and then also on the Apex Communications Network homepage. But Ryan, go ahead and tell them where else they can find you.
Yeah. Before I get there, real quick. Yeah. Like when people, the fact that so many people listen to me and learn history from me and English from me, apparently, it's just so humbling. Like, it's not something that I ever envisioned 4 years ago, 8 years ago, when I was like contemplating making it for the first time. It's
Mm-hmm.
just something that still amazes me to this day when I get messages and emails from people telling me like how it has impacted them, or they love learning from me. It's just something that's like so surreal. And to the fact that I'm like being suggested as episodes on classics professors syllabi is just like so mind blowing to me. It's like, whoa, I did not expect this. Like I said, I had no idea anybody would listen to me. It was just me wanting to put my passion and my knowledge somewhere into a creative outlet. And if
Mm-hmm.
people listen, great. If they don't, they don't. But I tell people, it's like I did this for myself.
Right.
And now it's become like, it's not like it wasn't a selfish thing. I was just like, I was doing this because that's what I wanted to do for myself. And if I helped people in the process, great. It was for me.
Right.
So you have to do something that's for you,
Mm-hmm.
and with a like for you, not like for you as like a passion, not like, oh, I want to do this so I can make money off of it, because you're just not. like, I mean, I think that's a good lesson in life. Like if you do a lot of things, just how much money you can make off of it. More times than not, it's not gonna probably be fulfilling.
Well, I know a lot of people that have a lot of money that are very unhappy.
Mm-hmm.
Very unhappy people because there's something very deep that when you have a lot of money, because there's a lot of people that grow up and they're like, if only I had X amount of dollars in my bank account, I could afford X, Y, and Z, and then I would be happy. And they have this mentality that they, continuously go through, and they're like, if I had this, I'd be happy. If I had
Mm-hmm.
this, I'd be happy. And then there's people that make it to the point that they have all of that and realize that they're still not happy. And then that depression gets even worse because now they're
Mm-hmm.
like, what else is there? I thought
Exactly.
that this is what it was supposed to be. Why am I not happy? But generally, it's because, like you said, they were focused so much on that piece that they lost their passion along the way.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're just in a
I
place
mean,
they
the
don't know
lucky
what.
ones are the ones that can take their passion and make a career out of it.
Exactly.
So yeah. Yeah. So again, you can find me. I have a website. Actually, it's thehistoryofancientgreece.com. I have a lot of resources on there. There's photos, videos, links to YouTube videos, links to other podcasters for just not just what I do. I try and make the website an entire educational model type of thing. There's recommendations for books and other podcasts and all that. So check that out. I'm on all different. You can listen to my podcast on pretty much anywhere you can get podcasts. I'm even on YouTube now. Audio. I didn't know people listen to audio on YouTube, audio only, but I guess they did. So I made it.
Right.
Yeah. I'm on social media at Greek History Pod. Greece History Pod was already used, so I'm Greek History Pod. I'm not the history of the ancient Greeks. It's the history of ancient Greece. It confuses some people, but Greek History Pod. And then on the Facebook page as well, it's the History of Ancient Greece podcast. And yeah, that's me. You should listen. I have a huge catalog, back catalog you can work through. The first few episodes are not quite as good as the later ones, so stick with me.
Yeah.
I get better.
Yep, I always
like a
give
fine
people
wine.
exactly. I give people that prerequisite too, where I'm like, listen, okay, you have to make it to at least episode 5 before you decide to stop listening to me. Because the first episode, like, I sound super depressed because I thought that podcasting was like, I have to be serious. This is a serious conversation. I need to make sure that I'm keeping on track. I'm going to ask these boom, boom, boom interview questions.
Mm-hmm.
And now half the time I go in and like we built an entire studio that looks like a 1920s speakeasy, and
Mm-hmm.
half the time we're cracking cold ones and having a conversation with our guest, as we're just hanging out like we're in the living room. Completely different style. So
I still struggle trying to draw that line, like with my single episodes, where like how much personality I try to insert into the script, just because I've heard people who try to put a lot of personality into it and it falls completely flat and just seems like fake.
Right.
And so like I was just like, well, I'm not gonna put a whole lot. I don't want to script jokes. like,
oh my God.
Yeah.
No.
But so like most of my personality comes out in the guest episodes or like, just one-on-one conversations on social media. I try not to be completely like, I try not to script. I mean, every now and then I'll make like one word phrases in the episodes that are just completely offhand, but like I try not to do it like all the time.
Right. Yeah, and it's different when you have a little bit of a scripted episode.
Mm-hmm.
Ours is a little bit different. But all right, guys, so you can go ahead and listen to him at all of the places that you had mentioned. I also posted the link to the website on the Facebook page, and I will post a what we call a pod follow link as well that'll automatically redirect you to his show, whether you use an Android or an iOS device.
Mm-hmm.
So Ryan, thank you for spending time with us today. I know that I am definitely going to be continuing to make my way through your backlog.
Appreciate that.
Because it is one of the very few shows that I could say holds my attention for a full 2 hours at a time.
Well,
sure.
So, high praise. Thank you.
No problem, my friend. So for all of you guys listening, you can join me tomorrow for another episode of hashtag Let's Talk About Something Else with Miss Kathy Yaros with our special guest host, Tracy. And then on Wednesday, we will be talking about good advice for parents with the host of the Working Class Hump, Mr. John Dietz. Until next time, keep chasing that apex.